Now, I don't know if you've noticed, if you've been on moose hunts before, or maybe you haven't, but you've heard a lot of talk about moose hunting and heard stories of other people's hunts and stuff like that. I don't know if you've noticed, like I have, and all the other guys I've been moose hunting with in the last several years. I don't know if you've noticed, but when it seems like, it appears like the moose numbers are down. But that ain't the case. See, what's happening is there's all this heater hunting, if you will. These hunters in their trucks driving the dirt roads, logging roads. They're just sticking to the roadways. And this was okay like 10 years ago, back when the moose numbers were immense, when the moose populations were pretty large. There were a large number of moose. And also, it was okay when the moose weren't educated. These mature, older 5-plus-year-old bulls are not dumb animals. I have a story to share with you in a moment that's going to illustrate just how smart, how intelligent, smart, mature trophy bulls are. Back to what I was just talking about. I don't know if you've noticed that, like I have, that it appears like when driving moose country up in the mountains and northern parts of Maine and anywhere where there's moose hunting, I don't know if you've noticed that it appears like the moose numbers are down. And really all of what's happening is the hunters are putting on the pressure on these moose, on the cows and bulls. The moose are getting educated as to where all the human presence is. And that you can't go about shooting a trophy bull moose anymore just by merely driving the logging roads, driving the dirt roads in moose country and heater hunting. That just all through the years, the last 10 plus years, the moose have learnt over time that all the human disturbance and all the pressure, the hunting pressure is on the roadways and trails and logging roads and dirt roads and stuff. And 90% of the hunters with a moose permit going after moose are doing just that. They're heater hunting. They're just driving the roadways in hopes to spot a moose, then park and get out and put the sneak on and shoot a moose close by the roadway. And that's an ideal situation because they're such a large animal. They're so hard to get out of the woods, to get onto a trailer on the back of a truck to go to the tag station and stuff. So don't be discouraged when you get a moose permit and you go to moose country and you're on a moose hunt and you're driving the roadways and you're not seeing moose sign, you're not seeing moose. And don't be discouraged in thinking that all is lost and that the moose numbers are down, that the moose aren't there, that the trophy bull that you're after isn't there. I'm here to tell you that they are. The moose are there. You just have to get off the beaten path. Don't be sucked into the heater hunting world. Just don't be tempted to just stick to the roads, the log roads and dirt roads and trails. You've got to hit the dirt running. You've got to get off the beaten path and get out there into the woods and scout and find the fresh, still steaming moose scat and the rakings in the trees and on the wallowing areas and the areas where the cows are grazing heavily and ultimately attracting the bulls to that spot. You've got to get into the woods and scout and look for these moose. Now I want to share with you a story that's going to illustrate just how intelligent, how smart these older trophy bulls really are. I met a biologist that was doing a radio telemetry, radio collaring, and doing a study on moose, bull moose in particular. And this biologist I met in Walmart, out of all places, and we struck off on a long-winded conversation about moose hunting, and moose in general. And this biologist told me that him and his other colleagues, they've been studying and following this particular bull moose for several years, for at least 3 years. And I think at the time, this was last year when I met this biologist, I think he said the bull was 5 years old last year. And they had been, so at 2 years old, they radio collared this bull. And they've been following and studying this bull moose and following his patterns and just studying him, learning his life history and figuring it all out. And they learned a lot about how bull moose like to travel their home ranges and how they go about living in where they live and doing what they do. So at 5 years old, now, actually, the biologist even said at 3 years old, when he was a little bit younger, this bull was, he was so smart. He knew, this bull moose knew to stay on high ground, higher elevations, on the ridges, and overlooking wide open valleys and lowlands below, and the roadways where all the human disturbance was. And this bull, he traversed his home range and through walking the ridge tops and mountain tops. And when they found that he was down in the lowlands and the cuttings, the cutovers, and near roadways, they'd make a move on him, try to get in to spot him and watch him, observe him. And every time that they would get near and start getting close by this bull, the bull would flee, and he'd go on a run, a mad dash for miles and miles and miles. He wouldn't quit. He wouldn't stop. He'd go over ridge top and through valley and ravine and over mountains. And this biologist said the bull would run like 4 miles away. He wouldn't actually come to a stop because they were following him through radio telemetry. He was radio collared. They could see through radio telemetry and on the computer screens where he was when they were approaching him, when they got close, and where he got, at the time that he got spooked as they were coming up with the truck, and when he ran and when he stopped, they could see all of this through radio telemetry, throughout whatever technology they were using at the time. And this biologist said the bull wouldn't even quit running and moving until he was like 4 miles away. He was miles and miles away from where these biologists were with their pickup truck. So that's incredible. That was like, well, I was taken aback by that. And this biologist said the moose haven't been spooked and jumped by human disturbance near that roadway. He'd run that 4 miles away and stop. And the biologist said they never went to where he'd stop, where he'd hang out that 4 miles away, however far away it was, to see what was there in that area, why he was hanging there for several days. But the biologist said it would be a couple days before he'd come back to the area where they first found this bull and radio collared him and started studying him and monitoring him. And he'd do that every time that human disturbance would come into the area. He'd flee the scene and he'd go miles away and he'd stay wherever he ran to for a few days before venturing back. But he always had the upper hand too on them. Whenever the biologists throw their packs on, get all their gear, and think that they'd get a chance to spot the moose and watch and observe him, they'd get all excited and stuff and antsy, and they'd go on a trek through the mountains and try to close the distance on this bull. Just when they think they had the upper hand on him and they were almost to him, he'd catch their wind or scent or hear or see them. He'd spook and he'd flee and he'd run and go on that 4 mile long mad dash again and then disappear for several days. So he said that they had the hardest time to get on this moose, to watch him, to do whatever it is that they were trying to do. I don't know if they were trying to tranquilize him, put him down to get change out their radio collar or tattoo him or get some bone marrow samples or blood samples or whatever. They're wanting to catch up with this bull for some reason, for whatever reason biologists need to catch an animal, right? So, I mean, they were studying and monitoring and learning everything they could about bull moose, and this was one of their subjects. But this moose always had the upper hand. Like I said earlier in the beginning of the story, this bull always stayed on the high ground, the higher elevations, where he had the upper hand, where he could see everything below him, to see any approaching human presence, or to see and watch and observe the cows. Yeah, so he'd always be watching below in the valleys and lowlands below to watch and observe his cows that he might be courting at the time, hanging with, and watch. And he'd also be able to tell tell of any approaching danger, any oncoming danger, and he'd be out of there in no time, lickety split. So this put it all into just perspective for me as to why a lot of people through the years, as time went on, as the moose hunts became more popular in Maine and stuff, it just all put it into perspective for me as to why some people go away with eating tag soup, not being successful, or they might just shoot a small, insubordinate young bull instead of a nice trophy wall hanger type bull. And that's because these older 5, 7, and older year-old mature bulls are that smart. You've got to take all this into consideration. That it's no different. They actually really aren't much different than a trophy class whitetail buck. I mean, you're a hunter. I imagine you started out deer hunting in your hunting career, and all deer hunters know that those older mature bucks are very hard animals to catch up with. They're very hard to kill. They're just because they always have the upper hand. They're smart. They'll move in the cover of darkness. They'll stick to the thickest of areas. Those mature bucks, they'll skirt tail the inside the timber and where it's thick. They won't expose themselves out in the wide open. They'll cut the inside corners, and the bucks will travel the shelves and benches and ridge tops. They'll stick to cover, and they won't venture out into the opens until after dark. And it sort of appears like there's the October lull is occurring, but that ain't the case. You just got to be. The deer activity is actually more in October, middle October, and on and through November. But you just got to. They're on the acorns or on the fruit, and they're on hard mass. So they're there. The deer activity is more. You got to really hunt smart and get in the woods. You got to get off the beaten path and get out there and do your scouting and find the animals. The same thing with moose hunting. Let's go back. I'm getting off track. Kilter here, talking about deer, but let's get back to the moose hunt. It's no different when going after your trophy bull. You got that moose permit for a bull, got that bull tag for Maine moose hunt, and now it's time to locate some potential bulls, some targets, and you've got to do that by getting off the roadways, getting out into the woods, and doing your thorough scouting. Find those heavy traveled moose paths to feeding grounds from their bedding like their bedding areas in the back in the bush on the ridges, mountain tops, and going to their feeding grounds out in the cuttings and the swamplands and wetlands and stuff. So you've really got to do your homework by thoroughly scouting and find where those bulls are hanging out. So yeah, that floored me. That was hearing everything that biologist said about that bull. That I was taken aback. I was like, oh wow. I mean, who would ever know that? All these years I've heard that moose were stupid. They were dumb animals. They were the easiest thing to kill on the planet Earth. And that is far from the truth. Moose are not stupid animals. These bigger, older, mature bulls have been around for several years. They have the upper hand on you. Trust me. They're smarter than you really think, and that smarter than what you've been told and told to believe. You've really got to put in the effort and the time to really locate and find and kill a trophy bull. So if you got that moose permit for a Maine moose hunt, and you're heading to moose country, remember all that I've shared with you in this video. Remember that story I told you earlier about the biologists and the bull moose and the hunt. So I wish you all the best of luck out there. I hope you're successful in filling your moose permit this season, and I hope you've learned something here today. If you've learned at least one thing in this video, then I've done my job correctly. So hey, smash that like button for me, could you, before you go? If you're not subscribed to Spikes and Gills yet, please subscribe now. Click the notification bell so you'll be notified of all future uploads. I'd really love to see Spikes and Gills grow. The Spikes and Gills channel won't grow without your help and support. So definitely subscribe. Smash that like button for me before you go. Great, appreciate it. Drop some comments below too. Let me know where you're going on your moose hunt. Let me know what you have for a moose permit, where you're going to moose hunt and let's chat up. Maybe I could share some other tips and pointers with you, or maybe you have something too you'd like to share with me. Please leave all that in the comments below. Smash that like button before you go. And definitely subscribe, Spikes and Gills, if you're not already. I'd love to see the channel grow. Can't do that without your help, everybody. All right, see you next time.